Welcome back to Woodside Walker. Today we're exploring a case that shook the foundations of British justice. The story of George Riley. Once a typical 21-year-old living for the weekends in Shrewsbury, George Riley's life took a dramatic turn that would ignite national debate, spark parliamentary protest, and leave a lasting legacy in the criminal justice system. Join me as we unravel the events, controversies and questions that still surround this haunting chapter in history. For George, Friday was payday, and with money in his pocket, weekends were a time for indulging in his favourite pastimes, drinking, dancing and meeting girls. Yet, even though he liked a good time, George was quite a sensible young man and wasn't completely feckless with his money. On Friday the 7th of October 1960, having picked up his wages from his job as a trainee butcher, his life was about to take a dramatic turn. In the heart of Shrewsbury, a young man's ordinary life collided with tragedy, controversy and history. This is the story of George Riley, a 21-year-old butcher's assistant whose final days would ignite national debate, parliamentary protest and a lasting legacy in British criminal justice. On this Friday, he gave his mother his money for board and savings before heading out for fun. But prior to the murder case, George Riley had a notable criminal record. At the age of 18, he was charged with wounding James Jarvis by stabbing him with intent to murder, as well as wounding Ian Shannon with intent to do grievous bodily harm and attempting to wound Michael Kenneth Davis. These incidents occurred on Christmas Eve, and Riley was identified by 3 witnesses. During the trial, a formidable flick knife was produced as evidence, and it was alleged that Riley had bought such a knife at a gunsmith shop. The court heard that Jarvis suffered a severe stab wound to the stomach, requiring surgery and a blood transfusion, while Shannon's right radial artery was almost completely severed. Riley pleaded guilty to wounding Jarvis with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and to wounding Shannon, but not guilty to the more serious charges of attempted murder and wounding Davis. The prosecution accepted these pleas, and Riley was sentenced to 9 months imprisonment for each of the 2 charges to run concurrently. The case also involved 2 others, Pauline Teresa Larter and Ronald George Bowen, who were charged as accessories after the fact for helping Riley dispose of the knife. Both were placed on probation for 3 years. The judge in Riley's previous case remarked on the alarming trend of young men buying flick knives and the dangers of combining such weapons with alcohol. He noted that it was only by chance that Riley was not facing capital charges or charges involving deaths, as the injuries inflicted could easily have been fatal. On the evening of Friday, October the 7th, 1960, George ate tea with his family in the evening, his mother, father and brother Terry, before getting dressed for a night out. At 7:15 p.m, his friend Tony Brown arrived, and together they began a pub crawl, visiting several local establishments while deciding which dance to attend. Eventually they chose the Sentinel Works dance at Halscott, but not before stopping at a few more pubs. By the time they arrived, George had consumed more alcohol than ever before, at least 8 or 9 pints of beer and 8 whiskies with orange. Despite this, witnesses, including 2 policemen, later described him as lively and noisy, but not truly drunk, exuberant rather than incapacitated. At the dance, an argument broke out between George and his friend Lawrence Griffiths. The 2, both heavily intoxicated, wrestled ineffectually on the floor until pulled apart by PC Reginald Mason, who advised George to go home. In the early hours, George and Tony Brown left the dance in Tony's car, giving another man a lift before arriving at George's house at 1:30 a.m. The house was dark. His family had long since gone to bed. Realising he'd left his house key in another suit, George chose not to disturb anyone and slipped into the garage, sitting down on an old sofa to sleep. A little further along the street, named Westlands Road, lived Mrs. Adeline Mary Smith, a 62-year-old widow. Mary was the second daughter of Reverend Mark Martin, who served as curator of St Paul's, Smethwick, and later as rector of Tregennan in Newtown. Mary Adeline Smith was educated at the High School for Welsh Girls in Ashford, Middlesex, and later attended Aberystwyth University. After her studies, she moved to London, completed a pharmacy course, and qualified as an MPS, Member of the Pharmaceutical Society. She was married to Mr. Stanley Smith, a lecturer in geology at Bristol University, who passed away in 1953. About 3 years before her death, she purchased her home in Shrewsbury, which was close to her sisters, Miss Dorothy Martin, a teacher who died in September the previous year, and Miss Olive Martin. Mary Adeline Smith was deeply involved in her community and church. She was a regular worshipper at Oxon Parish Church, a member of the parochial church council, and active in the Mothers' Union. She was known for her willingness and helpfulness in church activities, putting her heart and soul into everything she did. She was fondly called Gran by many children in the area and was a keen gardener. Her love for animals was evident in her life membership with the PDSA and her active role as a committee member of the Shrewsbury Auxiliary of the county branch of the RSPCA. She was also a member of the Shropshire branch of the Naturalist and Ornithological Society. The evening of the 7th, her sister Olive Martin had visited, and the two made plans for the next day. Early Saturday morning, Olive called her sister, but there was no answer. Concerned, she walked to the house at around 10 a.m, finding the curtains drawn and no response to her knocking. Seeking help from a neighbour, Army Sergeant Brian Bean, they discovered a broken pane of glass in the French window. Bean reached through, unlocked the door and let Olive in. Upstairs, Olive found her sister dead in a pool of blood. Mrs. Smith's nightdress was shredded, her face unrecognisable, teeth knocked out, and clear evidence that her attacker had worn a ring. The brutality of the crime shocked the community. Police began house-to-house inquiries. A neighbour, Phyllis Kay, reported hearing a single scream around 2 a.m. When officers visited the Riley home, they noted fresh scratches on George's face. When questioned, George claimed the marks came from his fight with Lawrence Griffiths. He explained he'd slept in the garage after forgetting his key, only entering the house at 5 a.m. when his brother Terry let him in. But when police examined his clothes, they found shoes, socks and trouser cuffs covered in mud, and even a live slug attached. George said the mud came from his flooded driveway, but police had found footprints in the muddy earth near Mrs. Smith's garden. The police officers decided to gamble, telling George they had enough evidence to prove his involvement, including fingerprints, footprints and more. Believing them, George confessed. He admitted to being in Mrs. Smith's house before and knowing she had kept her purse in her bedroom. That night, drunk and nearly broke, he decided to rob her. He broke a window, entered her bedroom, and when Mrs. Smith confronted him, he struck her hard, then knelt over her and punched her repeatedly until she lost consciousness. He insisted she was alive when he left and that he hadn't taken any money, fleeing in fear. Later, in custody, George wrote a statement confessing to the killing. As he signed it, he remarked, "I'm signing my death warrant, aren't I?" The trial of George Riley opened on December the 7th, 1960 at Stafford Assizes, moved from Shrewsbury due to fears that local prejudice would prevent a fair hearing. The presiding judge was Mr. Justice Barry. The prosecution was led by Kenneth Minette QC, with Peter Bruce as junior counsel. The defence team included E. Ryder Richardson QC, Peter Northcote and local solicitor Tony Hayes. The courtroom was tense. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on George Riley's confession, which he had signed after hours in police custody. There was little physical evidence, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, and only small, ungroupable bloodstains on Riley's clothing. The prosecution argued that Riley's confession was detailed and matched facts only the killer could know. They pointed to the scratches on Riley's face, which police believed were inflicted by Mrs. Smith as she tried to defend herself. They also highlighted the mud and live slug found on Riley's shoes and trousers, which matched the muddy garden at the crime scene. The prosecution insisted that, despite Riley's claims of drunkenness, witnesses, including his friend Tony Brown and 2 policemen, testified that Riley was lively and able to walk unaided and not incapacitated by drink. The defence, led by E. Ryder Richardson QC, attacked the reliability of the confession. They argued that Riley had not been properly cautioned and that the statement was made under pressure after police told him they had overwhelming evidence against him. Riley later retracted his confession, claiming it was made because he believed the police already had proof of his guilt. The defence also pointed out the lack of blood on Riley's shirt and the absence of injuries to his hands, which would be expected given the brutality of the attack. Forensic experts agreed that the killer's hands should have been badly damaged and that blood spatter would likely have covered the front of the assailant's clothes, yet Riley's shirt, vest and underclothes were clean. The defence further argued that Riley was so drunk he could not have formed the intent required for murder. They called witnesses who described Riley as having consumed an extraordinary amount of alcohol that night. However, the prosecution countered with testimony that Riley was not as drunk as he claimed, and that he was able to recall details of the night and interact with others normally. Throughout the trial, the police officers involved in the investigation were subjected to fierce cross-examination. The defence suggested that Riley's confession was a result of suggestion and pressure, even likening the process to brainwashing. Detective Inspector Brumpton and Detective Sergeant Phillips denied any impropriety, insisting that Riley was treated with courtesy and that no threats or promises were made. The judge instructed the jury to consider whether they believed the police had acted improperly or whether Riley's confession was genuine. The jury, made up of 8 men and 4 women, deliberated for nearly 2 hours. In the end, they found George Riley guilty of capital murder, largely on the strength of his confession. Because Riley admitted that his intent was to steal, the murder was classified as a capital offence under the 1957 Homicide Act. Mr. Justice Barry donned the traditional black cap and sentenced Riley to death by hanging. As the sentence was pronounced, Riley stood pale and expressionless in the dock, clutching the front rail. His father, who was present every day of the trial, watched as his son was led away to the condemned cell. The trial, one of the longest murder cases in Shropshire's history, ended with a verdict that would spark national debate and calls for reform. An appeal was immediately lodged but later disallowed. George's family, convinced of his innocence, began a campaign for reprieve. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. George Riley, visit him in the condemned cell twice a week, joined by his brothers and close friends. Over 2,000 signatures were collected for a petition to the Home Secretary, Mr. R.A. Butler. The case drew national attention, with MPs, legal experts and the public raising concerns about the reliance on George's confession, drawing parallels to the infamous Timothy Evans case, where a man was hanged based on a confession later believed to be false. Labour MP Victor Yates demanded an inquiry, presenting new information to the Home Secretary. Television star Ludovic Kennedy, who had written about the Evans case, received a report on George Riley's trial, raising doubts about the conviction. Despite last-minute efforts, including appeals to the Queen, no reprieve was granted. MPs protested in Parliament, and the Howard League for Penal Reform urged further action. The final days of George Riley were marked by desperate hope and mounting public attention. As the date of execution approached, his family and supporters made every possible effort to save him. On the morning of February the 9th, 1961, a silent crowd gathered outside Shrewsbury Prison. Among them were George Riley's father, brothers, his former girlfriend Phyllis Rock, and close friends. His mother, too ill to attend, remained at home. Inside the prison, the atmosphere was tense and sombre. The execution took place in the permanent stone shed at the rear of the prison, the same place where 5 others had been hanged in the 20th century. The prison chaplain, the doctor and the under-sheriff were present to witness the event. At 8 a.m, George Riley was led to the gallows. The execution was carried out swiftly and, according to the coroner's inquest held just hours later, expeditiously and humanely. The jury at the inquest was instructed to focus only on the formalities, confirming Riley's identity, the manner of execution and the cause of death. The verdict was returned in accordance with the medical evidence. Outside, the crowd remained silent as the news spread. There were no demonstrations, only a single man marching with a placard quoting the Bible. Notices were no longer posted on the prison doors, a practice abandoned to avoid inciting protests. By 9 a.m, the crowd had dispersed and the prison returned to its routine. The execution of George Riley sent shockwaves through Britain. The case became a focal point for national debate about the use of confessions in police custody and the reliability of such evidence. In Parliament, MPs questioned the Home Secretary about the dangers of convictions based solely on confessions, especially when obtained without corroborating evidence. The Home Secretary, Mr Butler, eventually ordered an inquiry into the use of police confessions, though he maintained there had been no miscarriage of justice in Riley's case. The Chief Constable of Shropshire publicly defended the integrity of the police, rejecting all allegations of impropriety. The story of George Riley is a haunting reminder of the complexities of justice, the dangers of relying on confessions, and the irreversible nature of the death penalty. His case helped shape the debate that led to the suspension of capital punishment in Britain. Today, the gallows at Shrewsbury Prison stand as a relic, a silent witness to a time when a young man's fate could be sealed by a single confession. There is no record that I can find of the funeral of Mrs Adeline Mary Smith. Her husband was buried down in Bristol, so I'm assuming and hoping she was buried next to him. Thank you for walking with me through the story of George Riley. This case is a powerful reminder that history isn't just about dates and verdicts, it's about real people, real families, and the choices that shape our world. As I researched and shared this story, I found myself reflecting on how easily a life can be changed forever, and how important it is to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeking justice. If this story moved you or made you think, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please consider liking and subscribing to Woodside Walker for more journeys into the past, where every step uncovers a new perspective. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep walking with history.